The whispering shadows. It was a chilly autumn evening when the wind howled through the trees like an eerie melody. Lucy, a spirited 14-year-old, had planned this sleepover for weeks. Her three best friends, Emma, Rachel, and Sarah, arrived one by one, carrying sleeping bags, snacks, and their usual excitement. Lucy lived on the outskirts of town in a house that seemed to belong in a scary movie. The place was old, creaky, and surrounded by towering trees that swayed like ghostly figures in the night. "This is going to be so much fun," Lucy exclaimed as she greeted her friends at the door. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon, the girls were laughing and chatting in the living room. The room was dimly lit, with a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. They had a pile of snacks on the coffee table and blankets spread out across the floor. Lucy's parents were out of town for the weekend, which made everything feel like a true adventure. "Okay, who's got the best ghost story?" Emma asked, settling into her spot on the floor. She loved anything spooky, and often prided herself on being the bravest in the group. Rachel and Sarah exchanged nervous glances. They weren't as fond of scary things, but they didn't want to seem like cowards either. Lucy grinned and leaned forward. "This house is perfect for ghost stories," she said, lowering her voice for dramatic effect. "Did you know there's an attic here that no one ever goes into? My parents told me it's just full of old junk, but I've always thought it seemed creepy." Sarah shivered. "Why does it have to be creepy? Maybe it's just dusty and boring." Or maybe, Emma interrupted with a mischievous glint in her eye, "there's something up there waiting to be discovered." The girls laughed nervously, though Rachel stayed quiet, glancing at the ceiling as if imagining what lay above them. Time passed quickly as they told spooky tales, each trying to outdo the others. The house's natural creaks and groans added to the atmosphere, making every sound seem like part of the stories. As the clock struck midnight, Emma sat up suddenly. "You know what we need to do? Play truth or dare." "Classic Emma," Lucy said, rolling her eyes playfully. "Fine, but no chickening out." "Agreed." Everyone nodded, though Rachel's expression was less certain. The game started innocently enough with truths about crushes and dares to eat strange combinations of snacks, but when it was Lucy's turn, her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Rachel," Lucy said, "I dare you to go to the attic and stay there for 5 minutes." Rachel's face turned pale. "Are you serious? Why me?" "Because you're the quietest. We need to see if you can handle it," Emma teased. I don't know," Rachel stammered. "It's just an attic, right?" "Exactly," Lucy said, handing Rachel a flashlight. "Just 5 minutes. We'll even stay by the ladder." After a moment of hesitation, Rachel sighed. "Fine. But if something jumps out at me, you're all coming to get me." The group followed Rachel to the base of the attic ladder, giggling nervously. Lucy's house had one of those pull-down ladders, and it creaked loudly as Rachel climbed up. The flashlight's beam wobbled as she opened the attic door and stepped inside. The attic was dark and smelled of dust and mildew. Old furniture and boxes were scattered around, their shapes barely visible in the dim light. As Rachel's flashlight moved across the room, the beam landed on a rocking chair in the corner. It was empty, but its slight motion made her stomach twist. "It's fine," she whispered to herself. "Just an old chair." The door suddenly slammed shut behind her, making her scream. Down below, the other girls shouted in surprise. Rachel ran to the door and pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. "Guys, open the door," she yelled. "We're trying," Lucy shouted back, but the door wouldn't move no matter how hard they pulled. Then Rachel heard a faint, raspy whisper coming from the darkness. It sounded like her name. Rachel. Her heart raced as she swung the flashlight around. The beam caught a shadow darting behind an old trunk. She froze, her hands trembling. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice shaking. No answer came, but the whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Let me out," she screamed, banging on the door. The girls below were panicking, pulling at the door with all their strength. Finally, the door flew open and Rachel stumbled out, pale and shaking. "There's someone up there," she whispered. The girls exchanged terrified glances. Emma tried to act brave. "We have to check. Maybe it's just an animal or something." "An animal that whispers," Sarah shot back, her eyes wide. Despite their fear, they decided to investigate together. Armed with flashlights, they climbed into the attic. The room was silent and still, with nothing out of place except for a small, dusty doll sitting on the rocking chair. Its glassy eyes seemed to watch them. "That wasn't there before," Rachel whispered. "Let's get out of here," Lucy said, her voice trembling. They hurried back down and closed the attic door, trying to shake off the unease. But the night wasn't over. Strange things kept happening. Footsteps echoed in the hallway when no one was there. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision. The lights flickered on and off. The girls huddled together in the living room, too scared to sleep. By morning, they packed up and left, vowing never to speak of that night again. Lucy's family moved out a few months later, claiming the house felt off to this day. None of the girls know what really happened in the attic that night or what might still be waiting there. The haunted lake house. Jake was thrilled when his parents gave him permission to invite his three best friends Ben, Sam, and Tyler to spend the weekend at his family's lake house. They had all been friends since elementary school and were always looking for new adventures. The lake house seemed like the perfect spot. It was a large rustic home that sat right on the edge of a calm, dark lake surrounded by tall, ancient trees. Jake's parents told him the house had been in the family for generations, passed down from one owner to the next. It was peaceful and quiet, a perfect escape from the noise of the city. What Jake didn't know was that the house also held a dark secret. The boys arrived on a sunny Friday afternoon, full of energy and excitement. Jake led the way, carrying his backpack and a cooler full of snacks. "Wait until you see the view from the dock," he said, grinning. The house looked welcoming, with its wooden porch, large windows, and flower boxes that Jake's mom kept filled with colorful blooms. The lake sparkled in the sunlight, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the surrounding woods. "This is awesome," Ben said, dropping his bag on the porch and taking in the view. "I can't believe your family owns this place." "Yeah, it's like something out of a movie," Sam added. He was the quiet one of the group, always observant and thoughtful. "I called dibs on the biggest room," Tyler joked, pushing past the others to get inside. He was the jokester of the group, always ready with a laugh. Inside, the house was just as beautiful as it looked from the outside. The living room had a big stone fireplace, a plush couch, and shelves filled with books and board games. The kitchen was cozy with wooden cabinets and a long dining table. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, each with big windows that looked out at the lake or the woods. The boys quickly claimed their spaces, unpacked, and set out to explore the property. The afternoon was spent swimming in the lake, tossing a frisbee around, and paddling a small rowboat Jake's family kept tied to the dock. Everything felt perfect. As the sun set, the boys sat on the dock, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. "This place is amazing," Tyler said, skipping a rock across the water. "We should come here every summer." "Definitely," Ben agreed. "But you know, a place this old has to have some kind of creepy story, right, Jake?" Jake shrugged. "I mean, my parents never said anything. They just said the house has been in the family forever. But I guess there could be some old ghost story or something. Want me to make one up?" "Nah," Ben said with a laugh. "I'm just saying, a place like this feels like it should have a history." The group stayed up late that night, eating snacks, playing video games, and telling silly stories. Around 1 a.m., Ben had an idea. "Let's go out to the dock and look at the stars," he said. "It's so dark out here, we'll see everything." The others agreed, grabbing flashlights and blankets before heading outside. The night air was cold, and the lake was completely still. It looked like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the stars above. The boys spread out their blankets on the dock and lay down, staring up at the sky. "I've never seen so many stars," Sam said quietly. "It's beautiful." For a while, they sat in silence, enjoying the peacefulness of the moment. But then Tyler noticed something. "Hey, look at the water," he said, sitting up. "Do you see those ripples?" The others sat up, shining their flashlights on the lake. Small ripples were forming, spreading out in circles from the center of the lake. "It's probably just a fish," Ben said, though he sounded uncertain. "Maybe," Tyler said. "But it looks weird, like there's something moving under the water." They watched the ripples for a while, but nothing else happened. Eventually, they shrugged it off and lay back down. But just as they were starting to relax again, they heard something. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper, carried on the wind. "Did you hear that?" Sam asked, sitting up again. His voice was shaky. "Yeah," Ben said. "It's probably just the wind." But the whispering grew louder, and it didn't sound like the wind anymore. It sounded like voices coming from the lake. The boys sat frozen, staring at the water. Then, out of nowhere, Jake let out a scream. Something had grabbed his foot and was pulling him toward the edge of the dock. "Help," he shouted, struggling to pull himself free. The others sprang into action, grabbing him and pulling him back. They shone their flashlights on the water, but there was nothing there. The ripples had stopped, and the lake was still again. Shaken, the boys hurried back to the house, locking the door behind them. They sat in the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was that? Sam asked. There was nothing in the water, but something grabbed you. I don't know, Jake said, his voice trembling. It felt like a hand. But that's impossible, right? The rest of the night was tense. None of them could sleep, and strange things kept happening. They heard tapping on the windows, even though they were on the second floor. At one point, Ben swore he saw a figure standing by the edge of the lake, staring up at the house. By morning, they were all exhausted and agreed to leave early. The lake house didn't feel so peaceful anymore. Years later, Jake learned the truth about the lake. He overheard a conversation between his parents and a neighbor. Decades ago, a young girl had drowned in the lake. Some people believed her spirit still lingered, haunting the waters in the house nearby. Jake and his friends never went back to the lake house, but they often wondered if the girl's ghost had been watching them that night.
The old farmhouse. Mia's grandmother, Eleanor, had always been a mysterious figure in their family. She had lived in an old farmhouse in the countryside for as long as Mia could remember. The house was her sanctuary, filled with trinkets and antiques from a bygone era. It was surrounded by miles of cornfields with no neighbors in sight. The isolation gave the place an air of timelessness, but it also felt a little eerie, especially at night. When Mia was younger, she loved visiting her grandmother. Eleanor would tell her stories about the history of the farmhouse and its previous occupants. This house has seen many lives, she'd say with a wistful smile. Mia didn't understand what she meant back then, but as she got older, she began to notice the strange atmosphere of the place. Shadows seemed to linger too long, and the old wooden floors creaked even when no one was walking on them. After Eleanor passed away, Mia's parents decided to spend a weekend at the farmhouse to sort through her belongings. "We'll see what we can keep and what needs to be donated," Mia's mother explained. The idea of staying in the farmhouse without her grandmother felt unsettling to Mia, so she invited her best friends Claire, Olivia, and Sophie to come along. "It'll be like a sleepover," Mia said. "We can keep each other company," her friends eagerly agreed. They loved the idea of exploring an old, creaky house filled with antiques. When the group arrived, the farmhouse looked exactly as Mia remembered it. The white paint on the exterior had chipped away in places, and the front porch sagged slightly. Inside, the air smelled of dust and aged wood. The furniture was covered with sheets, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. "It's like stepping into the past," Olivia said, running her fingers along an ornate wooden chair. Mia nodded. "This house hasn't changed at all. It's like time stopped here." As the girls explored, they discovered a locked chest in the living room. It was made of dark wood with intricate carvings along its edges. Mia's grandmother had always kept it locked, and no one knew what was inside. "What do you think's in there?" Sophie asked, kneeling beside the chest. Mia shrugged. "I have no idea. Grandma never talked about it. It's probably just old papers or something." Or Treasure, Claire joked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. That night, after Mia's parents went to bed, the girls gathered in the living room. They brought blankets and snacks, turning the space into a cozy campsite. They played board games, told ghost stories, and laughed until their sides hurt. As the night grew darker, the mood shifted. The wind outside howled through the cracks in the windows, and the old house seemed to groan with the weight of its history. "Let's open the chest," Sophie suggested suddenly. Her voice was filled with excitement and just a hint of nervousness. Mia hesitated. "I don't know. What if it's personal? Grandma kept it locked for a reason." "Come on," Mia, Olivia urged. "It's not like she's here to stop us. And we might find something cool." After a moment of deliberation, Mia gave in. "Fine. But if it's boring, I'm blaming you." The girls found a small toolkit in the kitchen and used a screwdriver to pry open the lock. To their surprise, it snapped easily, as if it had been waiting to be opened. Inside the chest, they found a collection of old photographs, handwritten letters, and a small, ornate mirror. The mirror's frame was made of silver, engraved with intricate floral patterns. Its surface was unusually smooth, almost like water. "This is beautiful," Claire said, holding up the mirror. Sophie grinned mischievously. "What if it's haunted?" "Don't be ridiculous," Mia said, though she couldn't deny the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Olivia, always the boldest of the group, took the mirror and held it up to her face. "If anyone's here, show yourself," she said dramatically, mimicking the tone of a ghost hunter. For a moment, nothing happened. The girls laughed nervously, brushing it off as a silly joke. But then the lights flickered and the room grew comfortably quiet. Mia's dog Max began barking furiously from the kitchen. Suddenly, a faint image appeared in the mirror. It was a woman's face, pale and hollow-eyed, staring back at them. The girls screamed and Olivia dropped the mirror. It shattered on the wooden floor, the pieces scattering in all directions. For a moment they sat frozen, staring at the broken shards. Then the strange occurrences began. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows. Doors slammed shut on their own, and faint whispers seemed to echo through the house. Mia's dog refused to enter the living room, growling at the shattered mirror from a distance. The girls huddled together, too scared to move. As the night wore on, things only got worse. Mia thought she heard footsteps upstairs, even though her parents were asleep in their bedroom. Sophie swore she saw a shadow move across the hallway, though no one else was there. The air in the house felt heavy, as if something unseen was watching them. The final straw came when Claire woke up in the middle of the night. She had fallen asleep on the couch, but a strange noise woke her. Rubbing her eyes, she looked around the room and gasped. The shards of the broken mirror had been arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. In the center of the circle was a single, bloody handprint. Claire's scream woke the others. They rushed into the living room and froze at the sight. Mia ran to wake her parents, who quickly decided they couldn't stay in the house any longer. "Pack your things," her father said. "We're leaving now." The family and the girls left the farmhouse that night, driving back to the city in silence. The farmhouse was sold soon after, and Mia's family never returned. The new owners reported strange occurrences, like hearing voices and finding objects move from their original places. Mia couldn't help but wonder if her grandmother's spirit had been trying to warn them about the mirror and the secrets it held.
The locked room. Ethan was thrilled to have his friends Noah, Liam, and Jack stay over at his great-uncle's house for the summer. The house, a massive and creaky old mansion, stood on the edge of a dense forest. It was the kind of place that seemed to have stories hidden in its walls. The boys had spent the entire day exploring the sprawling grounds, racing through the gardens and daring each other to climb the towering oak trees. "This house is incredible," Noah said, his eyes wide as they wandered through the countless hallways. Each hallway seemed to stretch forever, lined with dusty portraits and strange antique furniture. "It's like a maze," Liam added, running his hand along the faded wallpaper. "How do you even know where anything is?" Ethan shrugged. "You get used to it after a while. My great-uncle's lived here his whole life. He's got stories about every corner of this place." "Do you think it's haunted?" Jack asked, half joking, but with a hint of nervousness in his voice. Ethan smirked. "I don't know about haunted, but there is one room that's off limits. My uncle says no one is allowed in there." Why, Noah asked, his curiosity immediately piqued. "He never really explained. Just told me to stay away from it." Ethan's tone was casual, but the mystery of the locked room had always lingered in the back of his mind. "It's upstairs, at the end of the hall." That was all it took to capture the boys' attention. For the rest of the evening, the locked room became the center of their conversations. They speculated wildly about what could be inside. A treasure chest? Secret family heirlooms? A collection of creepy dolls? When night fell, Ethan's great-uncle retired to his bedroom early, leaving the boys to their own devices. They gathered in Ethan's room, playing card games and eating snacks, but their thoughts kept drifting back to the locked room. "We have to check it out," Liam said, his voice low but firm. "I mean, how often do you get a chance like this? A locked room in a creepy old house. It's like something out of a movie." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know. My uncle was pretty serious about not going in there." "Come on," Jack chimed in. "We'll just take a quick look. He'll never know." The other boys nodded in agreement, their excitement growing. Ethan felt torn. He didn't want to upset his uncle, but the curiosity was eating away at him. Finally, he relented. "Fine, but we have to be quiet. If we get caught, we're all in trouble." With that, the boys grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed out of the room. The house was eerily silent, the wooden floors creaking under their footsteps as they made their way down the long, dark hallway. When they reached the door at the very end, they stopped. "This is it," Ethan whispered. The door was old and sturdy, with a heavy brass lock. Liam knelt down, pulling a paperclip from his pocket. "Good thing I know a trick or two," he said with a grin. The others watched in tense silence as Liam worked on the lock. It took a few tries, but eventually there was a soft click. The boys held their breath as Liam turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit, dusty room. They stepped inside, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. A strange smell lingered in the air, a mix of damp wood and something metallic. "It looks like no one's been in here for years," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shined the flashlight around the room. In one corner there was a large, ornate mirror covered with a heavy cloth. More covered mirrors lined the walls. At the center of the room stood a desk, and on it sat a worn leather journal. Jack approached the desk and picked up the journal. He opened it, flipping through the pages. "What is this?" he muttered. The pages were filled with strange symbols, drawings of faceless figures, and notes written in a language none of them recognized. "This is creepy," Liam said, peering over Jack's shoulder. Suddenly the door slammed shut behind them. The boys jumped, their hearts racing. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, turning to look at the door. He ran to it and tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he said, panic rising in his voice. "How is it locked? We didn't even touch it." The room grew colder, and a faint rattling sound filled the air. The boys turned toward the mirrors. The cloths covering them began to shake. One by one, the cloths slipped off, revealing the mirrors beneath. But the reflections weren't normal. In the mirrors, their reflections stood still and staring back at them. The figures had hollow, black eyes that seemed to pierce through the boys. "What's happening?" Noah shouted, backing away from the mirrors. The reflections didn't mimic their movements. Instead, they began to move on their own, reaching out as if trying to escape the glass. The boys screamed, banging on the door and calling for help. Moments later, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan's uncle burst into the room, his face pale and filled with anger. He grabbed the boys and dragged them out, slamming the door shut behind him. "I told you to stay out of there," he yelled, his voice trembling. "That room is cursed. You have no idea what you've done." The boys tried to explain, but their uncle wouldn't listen. He sent them to their rooms, warning them never to speak of what they had seen. For weeks afterward, the boys couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and every mirror they passed gave them an unsettling sense of dread. Ethan later learned that the room had belonged to a distant relative who practiced dark rituals. The mirrors, his uncle explained, were believed to be gateways to another world, but no one knew for sure. All Ethan knew was that he never wanted to step foot in that room again. Later that night, after Ava's parents had gone to bed, the girls settled into their sleeping bags in the living room. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the only sounds were the occasional creaks of the cabin and the rustling of leaves outside. Just as they were drifting off to sleep, a faint knock echoed through the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. The girls froze, their eyes snapping open. "Did you hear that?" Hannah whispered. "Yeah," Ava said, her voice barely audible. Lily sat up, trying to look brave. "It's probably just an animal." Knock, knock, knock. The sound came again, louder this time. Ava glanced toward the hallway where her parents' room was. There was no sign of them waking up. Summoning her courage, she whispered, "We should check it out." The four girls crept to the door, their flashlights in hand. Ava unlocked it and slowly pulled it open. The porch was empty, and beyond it lay the dark forest. The wind rustled the trees, but there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have knocked. "See? Nothing," Grace said, stepping back inside. Just as Ava was about to close the door, Hannah gasped and pointed toward the trees. "Do you see that?" she whispered. The others followed her gaze. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a pale figure. It looked like a woman in a tattered white dress. Her hair hung loose around her face. She seemed to be staring directly at them. Ava's heart pounded. "Is that?" Lily grabbed the door and slammed it shut. "Nope, nope, nope." They locked the door and huddled together in the middle of the room, their flashlights trembling in their hands. No one dared to speak for what felt like an eternity. A sleepless night. The rest of the night was filled with tension. Every little sound made the girls jump. Was it the wind, an animal, or something else? None of them could sleep, and by morning they were all exhausted. When Ava's dad stepped outside to get firewood, he noticed something unusual. "Hey girls, come look at this," he called. Reluctantly, they joined him on the porch. In the dirt near the cabin steps were footprints, bare footprints, but much larger than any humans. Ava's dad chuckled. "Looks like some kind of animal was walking around here last night." "Animal," Grace said, her voice shaking. "What kind of animal has feet like that?" Ava's mom waved it off. It's probably just a prank, maybe some teenagers messing around. But Ava and her friends weren't so sure. The footprints looked too real to be fake, and they didn't look like any animal tracks they'd seen before. The memory of the pale figure standing in the woods sent a chill down Ava's spine. The hike. Despite the strange events of the night, the group tried to go about their day as planned. After breakfast, they set out on a hike to the waterfall. The trail was beautiful, winding through tall trees and moss-covered rocks. The girls started to relax, enjoying the fresh air and the sound of birds singing. But as they walked deeper into the woods, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder several times, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "You okay?" Hannah asked, noticing Ava's unease. "Yeah," Ava said quickly, "just keeping an eye out for bears or something." Lily laughed. "If we see a bear, I'm climbing a tree." The group reached the waterfall by midday. It was breathtaking, with water cascading down into a clear pool below. They spent a few hours there, taking pictures and enjoying a picnic lunch. For a while, the strange events of the night before seemed like a distant memory. But as they made their way back to the cabin, they noticed something odd. A tree near the trail had deep scratches carved into its trunk, as if something with sharp claws had raked it. "What do you think did that?" Lily asked, running her fingers over the marks. No one had an answer, but the uneasy feeling returned, stronger than before. The second night. That evening, the girls were quieter than usual. Ava's parents tried to lighten the mood with games and s'mores, but the tension lingered. When it was time for bed, the girls decided to sleep in the same room for comfort. "We'll be fine," Grace said, trying to sound confident. "It's just a cabin in the woods. Nothing's going to happen." But deep down, none of them were sure. As they lay in their sleeping bags, the wind picked up, howling through the trees outside. The sound made the cabin creak, and every so often a branch would snap, sounding like footsteps. Around midnight, they heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, no one moved. They stayed frozen, their eyes wide with fear. The knocking stopped, but the sense of dread didn't go away. In the morning, Ava's parents found more footprints outside, along with claw marks on the porch railing. That was enough for them to decide to leave early. As they packed up and drove away, Ava and her friends couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. They didn't have answers, only questions. Who was the woman they'd seen? What had made those footprints? And most of all, what did it want? Years later, they still talked about that weekend, each of them remembering the woman in the woods in their own way. Some details grew fuzzy, but the fear they felt that night never faded.